Hello everybody, it's Mike Levin helping you fight obsolescence. And on the last video, I got both the Windows subsystem for Linux and LXD containers under that subsystem to a nice pristine state, which is good for go-backs. So I was debating whether to call this video Backing Up WSL or Backing Up LXD under WSL, or how to back up 50 gigabytes of data with no cloud usage quota, and finally, how to back up at home faster than a cloud backup. And like Mickey the Humble Tailor, I decided to do all with one shot. So let's go to my meeting notes, where I point out that WSL -list, sometimes I say minus, sometimes I use hyphen, same thing, is your friend, because these versions that it shows you here have to be typed in exactly. If it says it exactly like this, ubuntu -18.04 with a capital U, it has to be typed in these commands exactly like that. So I have the generic pattern, or I should say the very generic pattern here. And then I have the slightly less, but still quite generic pattern here. And then I have exactly what I'm going to type here. What I should point out is that, the command, the parameter is WSL space -- export ubuntu, what I just showed you, the version name, and then your location locally. So I could do this directly onto the NAS, but I know from experience it's nice to manipulate large files locally, then move them remotely. So this is a location that I just, make over here. In fact, I just made it over here, right? So if you looked at the full path going in here, this matches this right here. Then we give it an arbitrary file name. I'm just using the -001 standard, but .tar, because it is going to be a .tar file. So this is my command: copy, paste. Oh, that did not work. This is why I copy so often when you see me do that. There's interesting weirdness these days under Microsoft copy pasting between the operating system buffer and terminal. So sometimes you see me getting into habits from Pavlovian conditioning, copy, just to make sure it's really in there. So I start this going and then I pause the recording of the video, because you do not have to sit here and watch. All right, that finished. It seemed like it took about 10 minutes, which is a lot longer than it takes to pull down the original images from the Microsoft and Ubuntu repositories, but that makes sense. There's a lot of apt-gets and apt updates that have been done to these things, and there's 2 Linuxes. That was a backup of 2 complete systems. And so here's our file. It's 50 gigabytes, as I had known it would be, because I did a test run before this, and it's on my local machine here. So one of the first things we do is we drop it onto a network location. So you'll remember this is my NAS, my home cloud drive. So I'm going to once again do the simulation of the data managers, or the disk manager tools like Norden and Amiga's old Disk Master. I called it Disk Manager before, but it's Disk Master forever. And I'll go into my data drive on this side, and then I'll make a similar location there. New folder, Linux backups. Now, whereas I paused it before, I think I'll actually just let you see it, because a 50 gigabyte backup over Wi-Fi at home. Now, I don't have anything special. It's just the Verizon routers. And based on how long it looks like it's going to take, I might actually, I'm going to pause the video. I don't have to make you wait through this. But still, copying something like this locally, going over just your Wi-Fi router, is still much quicker than going out over the internet to the various cloud backup services. And again, this is a complete backup of 2 Linuxes. This is not the quick incremental backup. So, you got to give it a little bit of leniency in the speed it's taking. It's already up to, 2% done on a 50 gigabyte file, which is not bad, I must say. So, let me let the file size show there, and we'll be back. Okay, I paused at 2% and unpaused at 98%. It's taking a lot longer than I thought, probably about a half hour, 35 minutes or so. And I should have figured it's actually calculatable, and if I wanted it faster, I could have attached my laptop directly to the NAS. But nonetheless, for a full system backup for 50 gigabytes over the Wi-Fi, it's not unreasonable. So I'm certainly not going to be using that copy on my NAS for the recovery, but in a few moments I'm actually going to delete off my whole Linux subsystem and the subsystem to the subsystem, which is the LXD container, and then recreate it from the local copy of this backup, reversing the process essentially. And that gives me a quick undo because I'm going to get really aggressive about moving ahead with features with the Jupyter Notebook server running Linux side, and we're going to do nbdev and whatever pip installs and apt installs I need to do to get my full dev platform to demonstrate the really interesting stuff, because everything so far has really just been leading up to everything that happens once the dev system is tweaked out into just a right situation, you see, because I know these videos lately, this long sequences I've been doing are on the boring side because it's infrastructure, it's setup, it's tooling. But one, tooling is of great interest to me, and two, if you get your tooling right, everything else becomes wonderful and magical. Okay, so I've just created on my NAS this identical file here, the 50 gigabyte file, which I also have locally. That's fine. So I really don't need these two things showing anymore. And I'll go over to here, and we'll do WSL -list just to reassure you it's still there locally, and I can go over here and I can run that, and it will jump directly into the Ubuntu@Drummer version, which is the LXC container, LXD if you will. And let's see, I can exit out of that and show you the other Linux that's running. So this is the LXC or D container. I guess it's really LXD. LXC is only the command that has all the API control these days. It's really running under LXD. Or LXD, they want that pronunciation. They say that on the site. Here's the correct pronunciation, LXD, LXC. Okay. So then we also have the WSL instance, right? So they're both there. They're both Linuxes. And I'm going to exit out. Control-Shift-W to close that stuck terminal. And back here, we will WSL unregister. Right? Remember how to copy and paste the exact version. You highlight it, you hit enter, and then you right click. That's in PowerShell under a COM window. It's slightly different under the Windows Unified Terminal. You don't have to do that extra hitting of enter. But now we unregister it, and we do WSL list again, and there are no local Linuxes. We can go over here. We can try and run this, and instead of pulling up a Linux like it just did, it's going to pull up PowerShell. See colon backslash, right? That's PowerShell. There's no Linuxes registered on my machine. Also, the 50 gigabytes from wherever it was freed up and deleted. It's a little bit scary. You can do that without any warning. It's really easy to learn to lose your full Linux systems in a moment because there's no way it's putting that in the recycle bin. All right. So to reverse the process, I have this sitting here. And again, we have the generic pattern that was in the slideshow. We have the slightly less generic pattern that has, descriptive words in for, user, Windows user and stuff. Oh, that's not okay. That should be a username here to make it generic. So I probably will be copy and pasting this at some time to make it easier for my users out there to follow these processes to have similar future-proofing capabilities as me. All right, so now I copy this one, and that is importing it from the location where it's currently residing. And I just paste that in. I hit enter. And this will take a moment, but copying it from one place on my local system to another place on my local system, and when I say my local system, it's really copying it from one Windows directory to another Windows directory. Copying and not moving. If it were moving, it'd be instant, because that's like just changing a pointer in the file system. But a whole copy of a 50 gigabyte file will take a moment, but it won't take as long as doing the export. See, this export was, I think, a little bit more than just a file copy, because it had to shut down the running installation of Linux if it was running. It had to do whatever preparation it does for creating a tar file, right? And it's creating a tar file, right? So that has some overhead. This is just an operating system file copy. So I'll just sit here and talk to you as it's doing that, because there should be no overhead except for the duplication of a 50 gigabyte file. I will not pause it, but I guess I'll elaborate on why I'm doing this. I already said it. It gives a go back. It's a great undo, right? You can go crazy now with whatever you do Linux side. Not quite as crazy as if you were planning on pulling down new images from, say, LXD launch new Ubuntu images, because those pull down really quickly compared to this especially. But after you've been at it for a while, after you've done a few customizations to your WSL instance and your LXC instance, you want those customizations to be sort of snapshot and put on your hard drive for quick recovery, so that you don't have to build your system up step by step by step. Although a build script could do it. Probably a build script would do it faster than these file copies, from what it seems. But snapshot images have their place. And in particular, those mappings, right? Those mappings from the WSL that creates the .ssh file to have your private and public keys in order to do unchallenged repo cloning from GitHub, and has the mapping to the data directory to have the tools that you keep on your NAS, and the fact that those mappings trickle down into the container, so the container has all the same capabilities as the WSL host. So these are things which, although can be reconstructed with a series of script-like commands you fire off, it's nicer to have it as a image. It's just like doing a backup of a system. It's one of the advantages you should have by using containers. It's a similar advantage that people have enjoyed for years using virtual machines. So a 50 gigabyte virtual machine would not have been terribly uncommon. And it seems that the lower overhead of containers versus virtual machines is will only take you so far. If your containers happens to be a whole WSL instance and a LXD instance under WSL, you're going to still end up with like a 50 gigabyte file. It's just a lot of data. There's no way around it. When you're manipulating 50 gigabyte files, you're going to have a little bit of a wait, whether it's virtual machines or containers. So, is there anything else I can say to entertain you while this file copy is occurring? It should be the fastest step of these steps yet. I spared you from the really long stuff that had network overhead or the tarring of a file involved. Maybe I should pause it. I need to listen to this. And so there it goes. It was only a couple more minutes after I did the pause. 2 minutes. So I was a little incorrect about there's no overhead. So this is still doing something when it imports. It's untarring the image and putting the whatever, extraction, process that has to be done. It does that, but it's never as long to, extract as it is to compress. So it still was the fastest of these steps. And so now WSL -- list, which is the same thing, by the way. Whenever you have a -- long version, you usually have a single - short version, right? And there it is, Ubuntu 18.04 back in location. And since it's went through that process, it's all out of memory. So when I double click this, you'll see a double Linux boot again, an invisible booting of WSL Linux, and then the visible prompt appearing of the LXD Linux. I get to show you something. It went into root at Diamond Age. So it booted into the root of the WSL image. And that being the case, it never had an opportunity to run the .bash_profile, which is tied to a different username. When you're root, you can see this stuff, you can see everything. So I can first ls and show you nothing, but let's see, pwd, where we're at /root. That's our print working directory. It's a very privileged location. You can tell because of, instead of $$ it's ~# symbol, and that indicates you're at root. And you can go to cd/home, and then you can see the users that are on this machine. cd to nell, and you can see the files that are in there. Like there's the bash profile that would have executed if it logged in as nell. And then I can use, I could, now this is not the way it should be done, but I can always switch user, log in as nell, and that'll make me nell, even though it logged in initially as root, because super user, being able to do anything, can log in as other users. But that's not the way to do it. We need to exit out, and in fact I will exit again and exit again, and Control-Shift-W. This is a job for PowerShell once again. Now, there's no way you would know this unless you had to research it at some time. It's like really crazy. And it's not a WSL command here. It's a Ubuntu. And I only know this because I've had to do it before to get myself out of foobar situations. It's 1804.exe. Every version of Ubuntu you put on your machine, or any version of Linux you put on your machine, apparently gets its own .exe. Don't ask me why this isn't under WSL, but this is their decisions they made. And then you can config default user nell. And that's it. That's it. So when you do a recovery, this is such an important issue. I guess, in fact, I have made a note. I've run into this enough that I do believe I have noted that in the backup process. I don't think I copied it up, but it's in there somewhere. I'll make sure it's there just for reminding myself in the future, because that's kind of important. You find yourself logging in as root, it feels like a very different system than it was before. And WSL -- shutdown. And you'll see this system. I already exited out of there, so you won't see it forcibly exited, but it's been forcibly exited. And now when we double click into here, instead of logging in as root, it's now going to do the double login. It's going to boot up WSL, and then it boots up LXD, and it logs us in as our LXD user. Here we are again, Ubuntu at Drummers, and there you have it. That's been a full backup, deleting of it from being an active Linux instance, recovering it as an active Linux instance, and then resetting the default user back to nell. And even though it says Ubuntu at Drummers, if I were to do one exit, you'll see I really am user nell at Diamond Age. It's only when I do that subsequent login. And for people who are joining in at this point, if I ls-la, you'll see I've got this bash profile. And this bash profile is what causes me to do the second phase login. It has this little until do done loop, which is a bash script thing, because it takes a little while for LXC instances to be available. So this puts it in kind of a busy loop with a 1 second delay, which is nothing for computers, and waits until WSL has, fully booted, and then waits for LXD to have been fully booted. And once LXD is fully booted, it logs in as user Ubuntu. And there you have it, right? Not much more to show about it in this video than that, but it's actually pretty important because that backed up 2 versions of Linux in one shot and gives me an easy, quick go back to a very pristine state when I foobar the machine, which is something you should always be ready to do. You should be happy to experiment and blow away your whole system. It's experiences you should have in this world of containerization, especially. It was already okay with the world of virtualization, but now with the world of containerization, it's especially true. You should just, try stuff and, get past your fear. Let it wash over you. And only the command line interface will remain. No, actually, you get the best of both worlds. Thanks for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe and all that happy stuff. Later, Gators.